The Grand Hall in Washington buzzed with anticipation. Lawyers, judges, and scholars filled the velvet chairs, their whispers like a storm brewing. At the podium stood Judge Amy Coney Barrett, Supreme Court Justice, her voice sharp as she spoke on constitutional law. Her black robe gleamed under the chandelier's glow, and her words cut through the room with authority. She was dissecting a recent ruling, her tone confident, almost daring anyone to disagree. "The Constitution's original meaning is clear," she declared, "and modern interpretations must not twist its words to fit fleeting agendas." In the third row, Pam Bondi, former Attorney General, sat rigid. Her blonde hair was pulled tight, and her eyes narrowed as Barrett spoke. Bondi had been invited to speak later, but she wasn't here to wait her turn. Barrett's words grated on her, especially the claim that a key clause in the 14th Amendment was settled law. Bondi knew the history, the debates, the dusty legal texts that Barrett seemed to gloss over. Her hand shot up, bold and unyielding, cutting through the room's polite silence. Barrett paused, her lips curling slightly. "Yes?" she said, her voice icy, as if addressing a child who'd wandered into court. The audience shifted, sensing a spark. Bondi stood, her red dress ablaze against the muted suits around her. "With respect, Justice Barrett," she began, though her tone held no warmth, "your reading of the 14th Amendment ignores its drafting debates. The clause you call settled was contested fiercely, and your interpretation sidesteps that truth." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Barrett's eyes flashed, and then, to everyone's shock, she laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed off the walls. "Ms. Bondi," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I'm surprised you'd challenge a Supreme Court justice on this. Perhaps you've misunderstood the text. It's a common mistake for those outside the bench." The audience gasped, some chuckling nervously, others frozen in suspense. Bondi's face tightened, her jaw set like steel. "A mistake?" she snapped, stepping into the aisle, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "The mistake is yours, Justice. You cherry-pick history to prop up your argument. But the 1866 debates show your reading is flimsy. I've studied the primary sources, not just the summaries you seem to rely on." Her words were a blade, slicing through Barrett's smugness. The room was electric, every eye locked on the two women. Barrett gripped the podium, her knuckles whitening. "You dare lecture me?" she hissed, her composure cracking. "I sit on the highest court in this land. Your time as a prosecutor doesn't qualify you to question my scholarship." The crowd was silent now, the air thick with tension. Bondi didn't flinch. "I'm not questioning your title," she shot back, her voice low but fierce. "I'm questioning your logic. And I'm right." The moderator, a nervous man in a gray suit, scurried to the stage, stammering about time limits. Barrett waved him off, her eyes locked on Bondi. "Sit down, Ms. Bondi," she said, her voice cold as winter. "This isn't a courtroom for your theatrics." But Bondi didn't move. She stood taller, her gaze burning. "I'll sit when you admit your error," she said, "or prove me wrong. Which will it be?" The hall was a powder keg, ready to explode. Barrett's laughter had lit the fuse, and Bondi's defiance was the flame. Neither would back down, and the audience knew it. Something bigger was unfolding, a clash not just of egos, but of minds. Barrett, the celebrated judge, had underestimated her foe, and Bondi, the outsider, was ready to prove her worth. The conference hall emptied like a river after rain, scholars and lawyers spilling into the marble corridors for a break. The air still crackled from the clash between Judge Amy Coney Barrett and Pam Bondi. Whispers followed Bondi as she slipped through the crowd, her red dress a beacon amid gray suits. She headed for a quiet hallway, needing a moment to steady her pulse. But Barrett wasn't done. The justice, her robe now shed for a crisp blazer, stalked after her, her heels snapping. like gunfire on the polished floor. Bondi leaned against a pillar, sipping water when Barrett's shadow fell over her. "You think you can humiliate me?" Barrett hissed, her voice low but venomous. Her eyes were daggers, her face tight with fury. A few attorneys lingered nearby, pretending to chat but straining to hear. Bondi set her glass down, slow and deliberate, her lips curling into a defiant smirk. "Humiliate you?" she said, her tone sharp as a whip. "I stated facts. If that stings, maybe your facts need work." Barrett stepped closer, her breath hot with rage. "You're a nobody here," she spat. "A former prosecutor playing scholar. You don't belong in this fight." The words were meant to cut, to shrink Bondi into silence. But Bondi didn't budge. She straightened, her gaze locking onto Barrett's like a hunter sizing up prey. "And you're a justice hiding behind your title," she fired back. "Your 14th Amendment argument is weak, and I can prove it." Again. The hallway seemed to shrink, the air thick with their venom. A small crowd gathered, drawn by the raised voices. Barrett's face reddened, but she forced a cold smile. "Go on, then," she said, her voice mocking. "Enlighten me, Ms. Bondi. What did I miss in my decades of study?" The challenge was a trap, designed to make Bondi falter. But Bondi was ready, her mind a steel vault of legal history. She stepped forward, her voice steady but fierce. "You said the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause is settled law, tied only to its 1868 ratification intent. But you ignored the 1866 Civil Rights Act debates, which shaped its drafting. Senator Trumbull's speeches, recorded in the Congressional Globe, show the clause was meant to protect broader rights than you claim. You're narrowing it to fit your narrative, and that's not scholarship. It's bias." Barrett blinked, a flicker of doubt crossing her face, but she masked it with scorn. "Quoting Trumbull doesn't make you a genius," she snapped. "Every law student knows those debates. You're reaching." Yet her voice wavered, and the onlookers noticed. A gray-haired judge murmured to his colleague, "She's got a point." Bondi pressed her advantage, her words relentless. "Reaching?" she said. "I've read the original manuscripts, not just the summaries you lean on." Trumbull argued for expansive protections, and the framers agreed. "Your reading cuts that out." "Why?" Barrett's hands clenched, her authority slipping like sand. "You're twisting history," she growled, but her words lacked force. The crowd was no longer hers. Their eyes were on Bondi, whose calm precision was a blade against Barrett's bluster. "Twisting?" Bondi said, her voice rising now, sharp and clear. "I'm citing sources you skipped. If you want to debate, bring facts, not your robe's shadow." The hallway was a battlefield, words their weapons. Barrett, the towering justice, was faltering, her arrogance cracking under Bondi's onslaught. The onlookers whispered, their respect shifting. Bondi wasn't just holding her own. She was outshining a titan. But Barrett wasn't finished. She straightened, her eyes blazing with a new resolve. This fight was far from over, and she'd strike back hard. The conference buzzed as attendees filed back into the grand hall, their whispers sharp with gossip about the hallway clash. Judge Amy Coney Barrett stood near the stage, her face a mask of icy determination. The sting of Pam Bondi's words burned deep, and she wasn't about to let a former prosecutor upstage her. She leaned toward the moderator, her voice low but commanding. "Adjust the schedule," she said. "I want a debate now with Ms. Bondi. Let's settle this." The moderator, sweat beading on his brow, nodded and scurried off. Bondi, standing near the back, heard her name echo through the speakers. "We're adding a special session," the moderator announced, his voice shaky. "A debate on constitutional law, featuring Justice Barrett and Ms. Pam Bondi." The crowd erupted in murmurs, chairs scraping as people leaned forward. Bondi's eyes narrowed, but a spark of defiance lit her face. She strode toward the stage, her red dress cutting through the sea of suits like a flame. Barrett was already at the podium, her posture rigid, her smile thin and venomous. "Ms. Bondi," she began, her voice booming through the hall. "You seem eager to challenge me. Let's see if your bravado holds up under scrutiny." The words were a gauntlet, thrown with disdain. The audience held its breath, sensing blood in the water. Bondi stepped to her podium, her gaze locked on Barrett. "I'm not here for bravado," she said, her tone cold and cutting. "I'm here for truth. Let's get to it." Barrett struck. First, her voice sharp as she laid out her case. "The 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause," she declared, "is rooted in its 1868 ratification. Its scope is limited to the framers' intent, as I've studied for decades." She paused, glaring at Bondi. "Ms. Bondi seems to think she knows better. Enlighten us if you can." The sarcasm was thick, and a few in the crowd chuckled, loyal to Barrett's stature. Bondi didn't flinch. She leaned into her microphone, her voice steady but fierce. "Justice Barrett, your decades of study missed something," she said. "The 1866 Civil Rights Act, which shaped the amendment, wasn't narrow. Senator Lyman Trumbull, a key drafter, argued in Congress that it protected fundamental rights for all citizens, not just a select few. His words are in the Congressional Globe, Volume 39, page 600. I've read it." "Have you?" The crowd gasped, stunned by her precision. Barrett's jaw tightened, her fingers gripping the podium. "Quoting page numbers doesn't prove your case," she snapped. "The amendment's intent was clear, and your interpretation inflates it beyond reason." But her words sounded hollow, and the audience sensed it. A white-haired scholar in the front row scribbled notes, nodding toward Bondi. Barrett pressed on, her voice rising. "You're a prosecutor, not a constitutional expert. Stick to what you know." Bondi's eyes flashed with fire. "I know the law," she shot back, "and I know when it's being twisted. The 1866 debates show the framers wanted broad protections. You're shrinking their vision to fit your own. That's not expertise, it's arrogance." The hall was silent, every word a spark in a powder keg. Attendees exchanged glances, their respect for Bondi growing. Barrett's face flushed, her control slipping. She tried to counter, citing a 1873 case to bolster her argument, but Bondi was relentless. "That case came years later," Bondi said, her voice like steel. "It reflected a narrower court, not the framers' intent. You're dodging the primary sources because they prove you wrong." The crowd was hers now, their murmurs turning to nods. Barrett, the untouchable justice, was faltering, and Bondi was rising, a legal force no one had expected. The debate wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Barrett's gambit to crush Bondi had backfired, and the hall thrummed with tension. The justice's eyes burned with fury, plotting her next move. Bondi stood tall, ready for whatever came next, her brilliance undeniable. The conference hall pulsed with tension, the air heavy as the debate between Judge Amy Coney Barrett and Pam Bondi raged on. The stage lights glared down, casting sharp shadows on Barrett's face, her eyes narrowed with fury. Bondi's precise arguments had tilted the crowd in her favor, and Barrett could feel her authority slipping. She straightened at her podium, her voice a low growl as she shifted tactics, aiming to wound. "Ms. Bondi," she said, her words dripping with scorn, "you speak of legal history as if you're a scholar. But let's be honest. You're a prosecutor, not a constitutional expert. Your career was built on courtroom theatrics, not deep study. Why should we trust your word over a Supreme Court justice?" The crowd stirred, some nodding at Barrett's jab, others waiting for Bondi's response. The attack was personal, meant to paint Bondi as an imposter. Barrett leaned forward, her smile cold. "I've reviewed your record," she continued, her voice cutting like glass. "Your cases were routine, hardly groundbreaking. You're out of your depth here, and it shows. The words hung in the air, a challenge to Bondi's very legitimacy. Bondi stood still, her face unreadable, but her eyes burned with resolve. She stepped closer to her microphone, her voice calm but laced with steel. "You want to talk about my career, Justice?" she said, each word deliberate. "Fine. Let's talk about what it means to fight for justice, not just sit above it. You question my credentials? I've spent decades in courtrooms, not ivory towers, defending people who couldn't defend themselves. That's where law lives, not in your dusty law reviews." The audience leaned forward, captivated. Barrett scoffed, but Bondi pressed on, her voice rising with conviction. "You mentioned my cases," she said. "Let me tell you about one you won't find in your polished journals. Years ago, I fought for a woman, a single mother, wrongfully convicted because the system failed her. The law was against her, but I dug into the statutes, found a precedent from 1892 that no one else saw, and got her freed. That's not theatrics. That's law. And I did it while you were writing theories, not fighting battles." The hall was silent, every word landing like a hammer. A gray-haired attorney in the audience wiped his eyes, moved by Bondi's passion. Barrett's face twitched, her confidence cracking. "A single case doesn't make you an expert," she snapped, but her voice trembled. Bondi didn't let up. "It's not one case," she said, her tone fierce. "It's hundreds. And everyone taught me to question lazy interpretations, like the one you're pushing about the 14th Amendment. You say I'm no scholar? I've studied the framers' words in their original ink, not just the summaries you lean on. I know the law's heart, not just its letters." Barrett gripped her podium, her knuckles white. "You're grandstanding," she hissed, but the crowd wasn't hers anymore. They were nodding, whispering, some even clapping softly for Bondi. The former prosecutor's blend of grit and intellect was undeniable, her story hitting the audience in their hearts. Barrett tried to pivot, citing a legal treatise to regain control, but Bondi cut her off. "That treatise misquotes the 1866 debates," Bondi said, her voice like a blade. "I checked the primary source. You didn't. Why not?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Barrett's face flushed, her authority crumbling under Bondi's relentless precision. The crowd was spellbound, their respect for Bondi soaring. She wasn't just matching a Supreme Court justice. She was surpassing her, blending raw emotion with unshakable logic. Barrett's eyes darted to the audience, seeing their shift, and her fury boiled over. She needed a final blow, something, to turn this around. But Bondi stood ready, her strength unshaken, her genius blazing for all to see. The conference hall thrummed with raw energy, the stage a battleground where Judge Amy Coney Barrett and Pam Bondi stood locked in combat. Barrett's face was a storm cloud, her earlier confidence shattered by Bondi's relentless arguments, and the crowd's growing admiration for her foe. The Supreme Court justice, her authority crumbling, leaned into her microphone, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "Ms. Bondi," she spat, her words venomous, "this isn't about law anymore. It's about your disrespect for the judiciary. You attack me, a justice, to make a name for yourself. Your motives are as shallow as your scholarship." The accusation was a desperate swing meant to paint Bondi as an opportunist. The audience shifted, some murmuring in surprise, others waiting for Bondi's reply. Barrett's eyes gleamed with defiance, daring Bondi to falter. But Bondi stood unshaken, her red dress vivid against the stage's stark lights, her presence commanding. She took a slow breath, her gaze piercing Barrett like a blade. "Disrespect," she said, her voice low but resonant, cutting through the hall's tension. "I respect the law too much to let it be twisted, even by a justice. My motive is truth, not fame. Can you say the same?" The crowd was riveted, every word a spark in the charged air. Bondi stepped forward, her voice rising with unyielding conviction. "You call my scholarship shallow," she said. "Let's finish this then. Your reading of the 14th Amendment ignores its roots in the 1866 Civil Rights Act, which I've proven with primary sources. But it's more than that. The law isn't just words on paper. It's a promise to protect the vulnerable, to uphold justice. I've fought for that promise in courtrooms while you've judged from a distance. That's the difference between us. Barrett's face paled, her hands shaking as she gripped the podium. You're preaching, not arguing, she snapped, but her voice cracked, hollow against Bondi's fire. The audience wasn't listening to her anymore. Their eyes were on Bondi, whose words carried the weight of experience and principle. Preaching? Bondi countered, her tone fierce but steady. No, Justice, I'm defending the law's soul. You mocked me, laughed at me, but you can't laugh at the truth. The framers' vision was bold, not narrow, and I'll stand for it whether you like it or not. The hall erupted in applause, a wave of sound that shook the chandeliers. Attorneys, judges, and scholars rose to their feet, their cheers a testament to Bondi's triumph. A silver-haired professor in the front row clapped fiercely, tears in her eyes, moved by Bondi's blend of intellect and heart. Barrett stood frozen, her eyes darting to the crowd, realizing she'd lost them completely. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her. Bondi didn't gloat. She turned to the audience, her voice softening but still clear. This isn't about me, she said. It's about the law we all serve. Let's honor it, not hide behind titles. The applause swelled again, a roaring tide of respect. Barrett, her face tight with defeat, managed a stiff nod. You've made your point, Ms. Bondi, she said, her voice barely audible, the words a grudging surrender. The moderator rushed to the stage, stammering about closing remarks, but no one cared. The crowd was on its feet, chanting Bondi's name, their admiration unshakable. She'd entered the hall an outsider, mocked by a titan, but left a legal giant, her genius undeniable. Barrett slipped off the stage, her head bowed, humbled by a woman she'd underestimated. The law had spoken, and Pam Bondi had been its voice.